Good morning. How are you today? It's been another week of being quarantined. I hope you're having some fun times, and I bet you've even grown since I saw you last. Anyway, my hair is growing since I saw you last. Lots of things have been changing. Signs of spring. Maybe you found some mushrooms. I've been looking for wildflowers, but haven't seen any mushrooms yet. So I hope you've had a chance to be outside now that we can finally go outside when it's warm. Now, we had a big celebration. We had Easter 2 weeks ago, and I'm still going to talk about some things that happened on Easter because that was a really important time in the message of Christianity and the message of Jesus and what God wants us to know about Jesus. So if you remember the last time we were talking about doubting Thomas and how the other disciples told him that they'd seen Jesus, but he said that he wouldn't believe it until he actually could put his hands on the wounds in Jesus' side and in his hands. So he did become a believer. He said, "Yes, I believe." And then we talked about how there's that song, "I believe that we can win," and we need to believe in what Jesus tells us in the Bible, and we need to believe that there's light at the end of this pandemic tunnel that we're in. So today I'm going to talk about Jesus again after the resurrection. On the Sunday that he rose from the dead, Mary Magdalene and Jesus' mother Mary went to the tomb, and the stone had been rolled away, and there was no Jesus. And they were amazed, of course. So they went and started telling people what they had seen. Now, in the meantime, the disciples were pretty bummed. They were pretty sad. They'd lost their leader. They'd been following him all around the country, all around Galilee, and they really didn't know what they were supposed to do with Jesus gone. So there were some of his followers who were walking from Jerusalem on what they called the road to Emmaus. Just like we have a road to Libertyville, we have a road to Selma. They were on the road to Emmaus. So they were walking, because they didn't have cars in those days, on this road. And they were feeling kind of bad because they were talking about how Jesus had died. And what did it mean? And they were talking about maybe they'd have to go into hiding because they were afraid that if the Roman soldiers killed Jesus, that they might be in danger too. So I looked online to show you that there still is a road to Emmaus. Right here is the road to Emmaus. It's pretty rough. You're not going to drive much of a car down that still. And then, if you've been to our church, you know that we have a painting on the wall in the church. This painting of the road to Emmaus. That just happened to be one of my mom's favorite paintings. She loved the picture of Jesus on the road to Emmaus. But before I jump the gun, here's the story. It comes from the book of Luke, chapter 24, verses 13 through 24. So Luke is in the New Testament. You've got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in the first 4 books of the New Testament. So this is Luke. And beginning with verse 13, it says, "That same Sunday," that's Easter Sunday, 2 of Jesus' followers were walking to the village of Emmaus, 7 miles out of Jerusalem. As they walked along, they were talking of Jesus' death, when suddenly Jesus himself came along and joined them and began walking beside them. But they didn't recognize him, for God kept them from it. "You seem to be in a deep discussion about something," Jesus said. "What are you so concerned about?" The followers stopped short, sadness written across their faces. And one of them, Cleopas, replied, "You must be the only person in Jerusalem who hasn't heard about the terrible things that happened there last week." "What things?" Jesus asked. "The things that happened to Jesus, the man from Nazareth," they said. He was a prophet who did incredible miracles and was a mighty teacher, highly regarded by both God and man. But the chief priests and our religious leaders arrested him and handed him over to the Roman government to be condemned to death. And they crucified him. We had thought he was the glorious Messiah and that he had come to rescue Israel. And now, besides all this, which happened 3 days ago, some women from a group of his followers were at his tomb early this morning and came back with an amazing report that his body was missing and that they had seen some angels there who told them Jesus is alive. Some of our men ran out to see, and sure enough, Jesus' body was gone, just as the women had said. Then Jesus said to his followers on this road, as they were walking, "You are such foolish, foolish people. You find it so hard to believe all that the prophets wrote in the scriptures. Wasn't it clearly predicted that the Messiah would have to suffer all these things before entering his time of glory?" Then Jesus quoted them passage after passage from the writings of the prophets, beginning with the book of Genesis and going right on through the scriptures, explaining what the passages meant and what they said about himself. Now, just going back to this, remember that in the Old Testament it was predicted that the Israelites would be saved by a Messiah. So it had been foretold years and years and years before. So the Israelites were expecting somebody to come save them someday. By this time they were nearing Emmaus and the end of their journey. Jesus would have gone on, but they begged him to stay the night with them, as it was getting late. So he went home with them. As they sat down to eat, he asked God's blessing on the food and then took a small loaf of bread and broke it and was passing it over to them, when suddenly it was as though their eyes were opened. They recognized him, and at that moment he disappeared. So how amazing would that be if you had been visiting with somebody as you were walking along? Maybe you're walking along in the playground. Maybe you're walking along down Main Street Dowds or in the pasture or wherever you like to go to take walks on a trail. And it turns out the person who came up and visited with you turns out to be Jesus. Okay, I do have a video about this. And I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but it's called A Seriously Surprising Story, and you can find it on YouTube. It's cute because or funny or whatever, because it rhymes, the story rhymes, and it has a British accent in the narrator, and that makes it a little interesting too to listen to the way he tells the story. But go to YouTube and you'll find that video there. It will tell the story in a little bit more entertaining way than I just did.